So if you have a computer that is effectively like a human brain, the way you interface with that human-like computer is probably not with a keyboard and a mouse. You're probably going to communicate with it the same way that you communicate with other human beings. The eyes, the equivalent there is a camera. The ears are microphones. The mouth is a speaker.
Welcome to Unsupervised Learning. Today we had Russ, the founder and CEO of LiveKit, on the show. We talk about the future of voice AI, how LiveKit is powering applications like ChatGPT voice. We talk about how the keyboard and mouse will be replaced by the mic and camera, and much, much more. Super fun episode. Thank you so much for joining us. Well, Russ, thanks for being on Unsupervised Learning.
Thanks for having me, man.
Maybe to kick it off, LiveKit powers some incredible applications, OpenAI, ChatGPT voice, and many more. As someone that's been deep in this world for a while, how do you personally use ChatGPT voice?
A few different ways, actually. I'd say my favorite way is sometimes I'm driving up and down like 101, 880, those terrible highways in the Bay Area during rush hour. But I'll just pop an AirPod in, one AirPod specifically. Okay, I'm legal.
Gotta stay safe.
Yeah, gotta stay safe.
Street legal.
Right. So I'll pop an AirPod in and I'll just ask, advanced voice. I'll say, hey, I want to learn about some frontier tech. Teach me something about a topic that I don't know, kind of in technology. So it'll be like, oh, you want to learn about quantum theory, quantum entanglement, quantum computers, CRISPR, even some basic things too. The other day, I was talking to advanced voice about just how does lightning work, and try to understand what's happening during a storm. And so the amazing part about this use case is you have this tutor that you can just ask any question to, right? I know y'all have probably spent time in a college auditorium where the professor says, okay, any questions? And you just sit there and you're like, I got some, but I think everyone else already understands this, so I'm not going to embarrass myself. It's amazing how freeing it is to just ask whatever, quote, dumb question you have. And this model has the entire world's knowledge, but it just doesn't judge you.
Jacob and I certainly have a lot of dumb questions.
Yeah, I feel like we started this podcast as our own. We didn't need the advance in these models.
We also now know where Russ gets all of his fun facts from. So
yeah, we were saying before the episode that you have just a wealth of fun facts, and so I guess that makes sense now, given how you spend these commutes.
I gotta keep building up that fodder, right, for these kinds of conversations. I'm sure we'll get into some of those.
Maybe for our listeners, can you explain, how specifically LiveKit works with ChatGPT voice and kind of how that whole workflow kind of flows through?
So that first piece, there's a LiveKit SDK that sits on the device. Mm-hmm. And what it's responsible for is being able to access the camera and the microphone of that device. When the user says something, it captures that speech, and it sends it over LiveKit's network. What we really have is this edge network that it's servers all around the world, and they all kind of communicate with one another and form this mesh network fabric on the back end, where a user says something on their phone, wherever they're located in the world. That LiveKit SDK on their device hits a network, transmits their audio through the network to what we call an agent on the back end. Our agents framework as kind of like an application server in the web application kind of. As a the metaphor to a web application, the agents framework is kind of like an application server. Mm-hmm. So, in this case, OpenAI builds an agent using our framework on the back end. That's sitting there as a receiver that is getting that audio data coming from the user's device over our network onto the server. In that, that agent receives that audio. Mm-hmm. That audio then, depending on whether, so with the traditional voice mode before advanced voice, it was going through a step there of speech to text. So it's getting converted, that audio from the user, what they said is getting converted into text. And then that text is getting sent into the LLM. Mm-hmm. And as the tokens stream out of the LLM, they're getting converted back into speech. And then they're sent back over LiveKit's network to the client device, where they're received by that SDK, LiveKit SDK on the client device, and played out through the phone or the desktop computer or website. Mm-hmm. In the case of advanced voice, that speech goes from the client over our network to the agent. The agent then sends it directly into through like the real-time API, this WebSocket connection to the actual GPU machine. It gets sent from there directly as audio into GPT-4o. GPT-4o is trained, kind of has a joint embedding between like text and speech tokens, where the inference is done directly on the audio embeddings, and then speech is then generated by GPT-4o, comes back out through our network to the device and played out.
Very cool. Yeah, you've previously described LiveKit as the nervous system. Maybe kind of in this context, can you say a little bit more about why LiveKit is the nervous system?
We originally started the open source project around really connecting humans to other humans right around the world. And so the obvious use cases for that are video conferencing and live streaming types of applications. But then when we started working on voice mode, it was very different. It was this was connecting a human being with a machine, right? And the realization was that if a company like OpenAI or Anthropic, Gemini, et cetera, there's a variety of people working on foundational models. If they are building AGI, right? What is AGI? I was just listening actually to the Stratechery podcast this morning, and they had a segment with Steve Jobs. They just had a little speech thing that he said back in the 80s around how they were looking at the speed of all of these animals, and humans came way far down the list. But then the person who came up with this list also and was tracking all these speeds of these animals, I think the condor is number one. They also said okay, well, but if you take a human being and you put them on a bicycle, then they're the fastest.
Yeah.
And what it's illustrative of is that humans are tool builders, right? We build these tools that amplify our abilities, right? And so if you think about what AGI is it's tool builders building tool builders. That's ultimately what we're doing, is we're building the tool builder, a synthetic human being. And so if you have a computer that is effectively like a human brain, it responds to you and acts like a human and all of that, the way you interface with that human-like computer is probably not with a keyboard and a mouse. I mean, human I/O, the way that we're talking to each other right now, we're using our eyes and our ears and our mouths to communicate. If you have a computer that's just like a human, you're probably going to communicate with it the same way that you communicate with other human beings. And so that's the eyes, the equivalent there is a camera. The ears are microphones, the mouth is a speaker. Those are all of our senses. And so if OpenAI and Anthropic and the foundational model companies, if what they're building is really the brain, what LiveKit is building is a nervous system. You have to be able to take information from those senses, transport them to that brain, and then take the result of that brain and transport it back out. And so that's kind of what we see ourselves as building.
What does the world look like when we, maybe walk me through what an office looks like when we're no longer keyboard and mousing, but just have these, are interacting with everything around us in the same way we do humans?
I'm not even really sure what the office of the future is going to look like, whether that's just a desk in my living room or whether I'm on the go. I'm always in the office and I'm interacting with these agents, just via my phone or et cetera. I mean, I think the nature of work is going to change drastically.
Maybe your desk will be a Jarvis Iron Man style.
Yeah. I mean, that's an interface.
Always Iron Man with you.
I always have to bring back Iron Man and Taylor Swift to come up on the podcast.
Okay. All right. Well, we got
Iron
checkbox
Man.
for Tony Stark.
Stay tuned for Taylor Swift.
Yeah. Okay. I'm ready. I think that that's definitely one interface that I think is going to happen. I think creative tools are going to become more kind of voice based, more interactive, more multimodal in general. I actually send around this video to people of there's someone on YouTube did this compilation of all the different ways that Tony Stark interacts with Jarvis across the movies. And I think that that's definitely going to happen for creative tools, right? Where they'll do a lot of these transforms or operations on the actual assets, but that you'll be kind of the the orchestrator of it, right? Or the maestro that's kind of like, ultimately kind of shaping it, but not really doing all the mechanical work of the shaping itself. I think that's one way that it's going to change how we do work and what the office of the future will look like. But I think that the one debate that's come up recently is kind of like co-pilots versus agents. And I honestly think that it's going to be a hybrid of the two. How do humans work with other humans? Like, we have these analogies today, and even in the workplace today, there are some coworkers that go and just completely own some part of your business and drive it forward. And like, there are tasks that they go and they do, and they're autonomous. And then in other contexts, sometimes I'm pairing with someone. Sometimes I'm building something with someone. Sometimes I have meetings to go through a design of something, right? And oftentimes there are multiple stakeholders in that meeting. And so I think that it's going to shake out that way too. I think that the main difference, ultimately will be that you'll be doing a lot of this with AI and maybe not as much with humans.
I mean, obviously, it seems like you're behind this kind of voice taking over most things. Mm-hmm. I imagine there's some circumstances, whether it's privacy or sometimes people consume information or retain information better reading it. Like, I guess in this future you articulate of kind of us all interacting via voice, where are the areas where voice doesn't permeate, I guess, as you think about things going forward?
Again, kind of drawing a line towards kind of how do humans interact with each other. We still text each other. We still read text on the internet. We still type into boxes in places. I think that there's going to be places that we continue to use text, right? It's like text, voice, computer vision. Video generation is a bit farther down the road, and we'll see how that pans out. I'm not sure yet, but computer vision for sure. Like, we use our eyes. We're visual creatures. That's going to be an important part of the future for sure. But I think that text has its place. It will always be used in some fashion. To use a very concrete example, imagine that I do have a voice interface to a restaurant, right? And I want to order food, or I want my agent or assistant to order food for me. There's one version of this where it understands me perfectly. It knows my preferences. And I'm like, okay, yeah, like, get me the regular thing that I order from Mixed or whatever, the salad that I always order, right? And it'll go and it'll do that and all of that. It'll be perfect there. But imagine it's like a new restaurant, right, that I haven't tried before, or a new type of cuisine that I haven't had. And the AI doesn't know exactly what I want, but it still is helpful and it's part of that flow. You don't really want it to like read the entire menu to you. That's just not a good UX, right? I think like the future is definitely it's a kind of like a hybrid, right? Where voice makes sense in certain contexts. Like, the obvious one is hands-free interfaces, right? Like where you're driving or you're cooking or et cetera. Those are the obvious ones where voice is just a natural modality.
Are we going to need that? Are we going to be driving and cooking? Like, I wonder.
I was gonna say, to be honest, I'm like, okay, well, maybe we'll have a Tesla bot or a Figure robot that's like cooking for us. So maybe we won't be driving.
Even in Waymo, it's fun to set the music by voice. Then you don't need to touch anything, or I don't know.
I mean, I think like hands-free, things that are like far away, like those are pretty obvious, right? Any of the use cases that you might have for like your Siri or Alexa type of device, those are other ones too. And so I think there are scenarios where you don't want voice, or where it might be a hybrid where it's voice plus like some text, or plus like some generated on the fly UI that is delivered to you and you can just like tap a few buttons. I think what is unique though about how the interfaces will evolve is one thing, as an engineer, like my whole career, there's been this like oscillation around the idea of a thin client, where you don't have to have this super powerful device, $1,000 computer in your pocket, and it can like render all kinds of crazy UI, and you have thousands of apps with all this different UI, and then like my dad or my mom might get confused by like this app versus this app, and you're kind of at the mercy of like the developer's design chops around the UX. And my previous company, we were doing like pixel streaming of mobile apps, and we were trying to like build this thin client dream a little bit. And what I kind of realized with ChatGPT is like, well, what is the kind of native human interface to each other when we're not next to each other? Like we're talking, right? But when we're not talking, like what is the interface that we use to communicate with each other? It's chat. Like it's texting, it's Telegram, it's WhatsApp, it's Twitter, it's Slack. Those are all like chat interfaces. You have a text box and you have a stream of messages, right? And so you'll see people tweet sometimes like, oh, I'm so sick of like these chat interfaces with AI. I want different interfaces. And it's like, I understand that, but also like, what do you use many, many, many times a day with other human beings? Is you use a chat interface, right? Like, and so what if in some ways, like what if the chat interface is the thin client dream where it's just one UI to every single type of application, and you have voice in there, and you have on-the-fly generated UI, and you have text as well, and so like all of these modalities, but it's kind of in this very familiar interface where you interact with any of those applications.
And you mentioned these kind of potentially novel interfaces that are hybrid, like voice and text. Have you seen anything cool like that yet? That you think does a good job of this?
You know what? I haven't. I was talking to a friend about this actually, where we were talking about where the interfaces are going to go. And I think what you see today is you kind of have like, you have ChatGPT and you have something like Cursor and you have advanced voice, right, in ChatGPT as well. And the way it's working today is really this, I call it like you're interacting with applications based on a mode. So, okay, I'm in my car, or I'm sitting on the couch and like my device is far away from me, I'm going to use voice, right? I'm in like a voice context, right? Where voice makes sense. I'm in a crowded space, so voice doesn't make sense. I'm going to use text. Or I'm sitting at my computer and I'm in VS Code and I'm going to like use, I'm going to use text. I'm typing already. I think there's a lot of like really interesting kind of UI explorations that are going to happen over the next few years that treat the modality more fluidly. Like when I think about when I pair program, when I was at Twitter, I pair programmed with someone, they had a very strong pairing culture. And so I paired with someone for like almost a year and a half. Like every day we would write code together. And when you look at that kind of experience, swap out the person I'm pairing with for an AI. When you look at that kind of experience, it's mixing modalities like on the fly. Like we're both looking at the screen, so there's computer vision there, right? I'm typing and maybe I'm driving, and then I'm also asking a question to the person who's, my co-pilot, who's sitting there in the sidecar, and they're like, oh, I think you made a mistake there. And I'm like, oh, where? And then they'll take control of the keyboard, and then they'll start to like correct the code. It's this very like mixed modality kind of interaction, and we just haven't seen that in applications yet. It's very much been these kind of two bifurcated experiences. And I think over time, we're going to see a blending of those things, especially with computer vision too, as it comes into the mix. Oftentimes people use their eyes and, speech and hearing in concert. And so, yeah, it's really exciting.
And obviously we have these like much, OpenAI just released this kind of speech-to-speech model. I thought there's a lot happening in the audio world. What are you seeing out there in terms of like some of the use cases for, some of these speech models?
Yeah, I think that what OpenAI is doing, and others as well, right? There's Gemini Live, there's a few, Character.ai, Perplexity. They're building these voice interfaces to their systems, right? So you can interact with them using your voice. You can look up information, ask questions, use it as a tutor or a therapist in some cases. It's also useful for that. So these are kind of what I would bucket as emergent use cases of voice. There aren't a ton of companies right now that have just massive scale, especially on the consumer side around AI. And so that's why I kind of call them emergent. They're pushing the envelope. They're doing new stuff. I'm sure you all saw like Anthropic's computer use API that came out. Super cool stuff. And so these companies are like really pushing the envelope of like where this is all going to go from an interaction perspective, from a capabilities perspective. What's also happening, though, is that there are these low-hanging fruit kind of places where there's existing dollars. They are at massive scale already for voice. And it's more of like a margin optimization game than kind of like a user value, user experience kind of exploration. And that's in really like the telephony space. So, or telecom, like any kind of use case where you have to like call a number and you talk to either a human on the other end or an IVR phone tree type of system. AI is very rapidly going into that space. There's companies like Sierra and Parloa, et cetera, that are going into that space and really disrupting it by integrating AI into that space and reducing costs over time. And I mean, the telephone is a voice native system that's been around for, I don't even know, 50 plus years. And so, there's billions of calls that are happening around the world every single month. And so that's an area where I think there's like a immediate high penetration like use case for voice and AI-based voice any kind of experience where you're picking up a phone and talking to someone.
Is like latency a blocker there, or like what are you kind of seeing around that? Obviously, I know there's different amounts of inference these models need to do, and maybe more complex tasks that require reasoning. But I think we've seen kind of the chatbot customer support stuff explode, and I'm not maybe we're on the precipice of it, but I'm not sure we've quite seen the voice stuff really take off yet.
Yeah, I think there's a few reasons why we haven't seen it completely take off yet. So the chatbot use case has been around for a while, right?
Yeah.
It's definitely been around for a while, and it's not as latency sensitive as the customer support to use like just one kind of massive industry that is telephone dominated today. In the customer support space, there's higher penetration for these less latency sensitive workflows. I don't think, though, that it's latency that is really the reason. I think it really comes down to there is already a system that works at scale where it's a sufficiently large risk to go in there and like swap out the engine and expect that you're going to get the same NPS or customer satisfaction out of this new system. The other part about it, specifically for customer support, that is important is the AI models. They're not perfect. They don't get it right all the time yet. They still hallucinate. There's still kind of these evaluations that have to be done and bulletproofing. And so, because that's the case, because they're not perfect, you often have to have human in the loop. So it's not like you can just completely shut off your human contact center. You have to have humans still that are on standby or ready to jump in and correct the agent or take over for something it can't do. And so the latency, when we first started to explore building, an AI that you could talk to, this was like at the start of 2023 when ChatGPT, the website, had first just come out, no API or anything. And we were starting to explore that and build a demo there. The latency back then, someone asked me this recently. I think it was in conversational terms, something like 4 seconds, right? It was like crazy high. And now you have with GPT-4o and the real-time API, the latency is down to, I think, like when you use LiveKit plus that, it's like 320 milliseconds on average, right? So it's like a tenfold decrease. And human level speed in kind of conversational turnovers, that's around 300 milliseconds. So we're getting to this point now where it's fast enough where any faster is not even super beneficial. In some cases, I built this voice assistant using Cerebrus, and Cerebrus's inference is just so crazy fast. I think it's like 100 milliseconds or something they can do, or a little over, that they can do inference. And the model was like responding too quickly. Yeah. Like people would say something and the model would just start to speak already. And it's like, instead of like you being able to interrupt the model's like interrupting you. And people were like, hey, can you make, they would like wrote into us and they said, hey, can you make it like respond slower? So I think latency wise, we're already kind of at the threshold where it's good enough to replace these use cases or to be, to be viable for this use case. But it's more about systems integration that I think is a bigger challenge.
Yeah. And a lot of those integrations could be much slower on the back end, right? Like if you're a customer support system that then needs to go access someone's information to figure out how to resolve a ticket, and that could take much longer.
Totally. Yeah. That's a great point. Like something that you also have to do that I'm not sure how many people think about with these support-based use cases that happen over the phone is you have to go and like update systems like on the back end, right? You got to like move the record through Salesforce or, mark something here. And a lot of these systems too are kind of bespoke, right? They build their own custom software or they use an obscure type of vendor for whatever they use to track tickets and stuff like that. And so who's going to be going and like updating those systems? I think the ideal is that the AI model can also do that, which brings the computer use API that Anthropic put out into context a little bit, but we're not there yet. But we'll get there.
Yeah. What'd you think of the computer use stuff? I think you guys have done some multimodal type demos.
Yeah.
And I was just curious to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, we're really excited about it. Maybe a couple months ago, we were at an AGI House hackathon in Hillsboro, and I think it was Andrew Ng was hosting like this open source AI agent hackathon, and we put out this new kind of beta API that we haven't really even written about at all, which is a service where we run like effectively virtualized or cloud or call it headless Chrome instances, right? So you run browser instances in the cloud, and then the agent can actually hook into, like you build an agent with LiveKit's framework, it can hook into one of these browser instances and it can start to do work with it. It has a playwright interface, so it can like commandeer that browser and like, load web pages, click on buttons, fill out forms, all of that stuff. And there are other folks that kind of build this stuff too. This specific piece of infrastructure, what I think is also unique about the version that we have is when the agent is stuck, it can actually stream the browser as video to a client application, to a human user. And this is kind of lineage to my previous company that was kind of doing pixel streaming and interactive like kind of applications, mobile apps, by streaming them to your phone and then streaming the inputs back up. You can stream this browser. The agent can stream it to you and say, hey, I'm stuck. I have a password field you got to fill out, or which of these items do you want? I'm not sure which one you want. And you can actually go and like click into that browser and you're like clicking on video pixels, but we're replaying all of those events back up in the cloud. And it's like you have an interactive browser instance, a shared session that's streamed to you, but that the agent is operating on, and you can go and unblock it and like, nudge it in a certain direction, and then it can go back off and continue doing its work. And so when I saw the computer use API, I was like, oh man, this is kind of exactly in line with how we've been thinking. The way that I describe what we're doing with that kind of infrastructure is that previously, LiveKit had given AI the ability to see, to hear, and to speak. What we're doing with this feature that I just described is we're giving now AI the last sense that I think it makes sense for us to give, is the ability to touch, right? Because like, what do we do when we use our mouse and keyboard? That's a bit more abstracted away, but what do you literally do when you like take out your phone? You're touching applications. If you look at like the actual code, it's like touch events, right? Like you are touching the application and manipulating it. And now what we're doing with this tech is we're giving AI the ability to also touch, right? To manipulate these applications. That means something very different in the context of humanoid robots. That's like touching physical things. But these are more around kind of the capabilities that you're giving AI within like a consumer device, is the ability to touch applications like you can. And so, yeah, we're not going to work on smell and taste probably anytime soon.
I don't know what that would look like.
I don't know what it would look like either. But but yeah, I'm excited about it.
What do you like pay attention to in the voice world? I mean, I feel like we hear obviously there's like 11 Labs and like some of these like text to speech models. There's folks like Cartesia doing like kind of entirely new architectures. Like what's on your radar these days?
I think the area of focus for me, probably most recently, it's largely been in telephony, mainly because there's just an insane amount of workload in that space. There are so many phone calls that are happening that are kind of starting to get automated away. Just to use an example, like insurance eligibility lookups. This is something that like, I'm not even sure how many people know this happens, but where your hospital is like calling your health insurance company to like make sure that, you have coverage for a particular procedure that you need done. There are like just millions of these that happen, and folks are starting to like build AI-based, systems that go and like not just do like the kind of the human calls to, but where the AI calls out to a human, right, and reaches out to a human. It's the other direction, and so these are. I think there's so much happening there that I'm paying a lot of attention to that kind of in the near term. In the longer term, I think the thing that happened that I was really excited about, and I was just waiting for it to happen, was kind of the OpenAI kind of GPT-4o kind of fully multimodal model, where you have a model that is trained on speech, trained on text, and can take in any combination of those modalities and then output any combination of those modalities. Another interesting thing that I've been following specifically around like Cartesia and these kind of different architectures from the transformer specifically, I am interested in kind of how does kind of the voice workflow play out as you get models that are capable of running on device. Mm-hmm. I don't exactly know how it's all going to shake out, but it's something that I've been kind of following a bit more casually, but very interested in.
Just to that point, like, how do you think about what will run on device? Cartesia, obviously, they have some great models that run on device versus kind of bigger ones that may be more intelligent or whatever in the cloud. And like, how do you think about what may happen where, and realizing that it's kind of early days right now?
Yeah, it's early days. So I think that I think it's really interesting how the split is gonna play out. One area where I think the split is going to be super important is in humanoid robotics. Or in robotics in general, but everyone's talking about humanoids. So we'll just talk about humanoids.
Thanks, Elon.
Yeah, exactly. Appreciate it. With humanoid robots, if you look at like the Figure robot, for example, they mention how I believe they do some like planning and reasoning. They do that kind of in the cloud. I think maybe they also use OpenAI. I'm not 100% sure for that piece. But then there are actually on-device models that do a bunch of like the kind of reflex action and an application of that planning or reasoning. Maybe like even just the kinematics and the movement of the robot. And so that's like one clear example of like it does not really make sense to me to put like the movement or the application of once a plan is developed, put that like in the cloud, or even put it at the edge. The edge here meaning like where the internet backbone is, not edge
not
device.
On device.
Yeah. I think you want that stuff running on device, right? I mean, if your robot is walking and then there's like a car coming and it's like, I got to go to the cloud. I got to step back onto the sidewalk. It's that's just not going to fly. And so I think ultimately the way it shakes out is there will be some that's done on the device. There will be some that's done in the cloud. One thing I like to kind of draw an analogy to, again, kind of with humans, is there is no human analogy for a model that runs, like if you think of me as a device and you as a device and Jacob as a device, like none of us have all of the world's information in our heads. And when we need to go look up information, we do inference in the cloud. Like we go and we take out our phone and we like look up some stuff. Or when we need like our router rebooted, or if it, or if we need our router fixed, right? And if rebooting it doesn't fix it, you got to go call like an AI contact center and talk it through what your problem is. And that's cloud inference, right? Like your local model is not going to understand like the latest Linksys spec and how to fix issues there. So I think that there's going to always be some inference that is happening in the cloud. And there's also going to be some that's happening on the device as well. And that's just kind of the same analogy that happens with humans. Mm-hmm. The thought for me, and I don't know how it's going to shake out, is do you want that cloud model to respond immediately? Or do you want your local model to say, you know what, I don't know yet. Let me go and ask my friend over here. Or do you want that friend to like always be listening and then respond? I mean, let's just start from like the ideal scenario. If there were no resource constraints, what you'd probably do is you'd probably like parallel path both. You'd have the local model doing inference, if inference was free, let's say, and then you would, which is the ideal scenario, and then you'd have also like the cloud model doing inference, and the fastest responder effectively with a real answer would be one of the two. And so even in that case, and again, I don't know how it's going to shake out ultimately around resource constraints, but in that world, you're kind of doing both, right? And so then there's all kinds of other stuff too. Like if your model makes a mistake, do you need to like have a record of like what it said, what was said to it, what it saw, if in a computer vision scenario, for legal reasons, for generating, updated training data, for like data labeling, for, erroneous examples, et cetera. So you're going to be sending that data to the cloud in general is how I think it's going to shake out. There are going to be some privacy, sensitive use cases where I think people will want something that's happening purely locally on the device. And it's locked to them and we'll see how that shakes out. But even like the new Apple Intelligence stuff also sends to the cloud. Yeah. It's just a very, very secure, super secure cloud.
We usually end with a quick fire round.
Nice.
And so we will ask you a series of questions, kind of classic fire round. And maybe to kick it off, what's overhyped and underhyped in AI today?
Overhyped, transformers. Underhyped, or call it under-researched, is spiking neural networks. I've been like really interested in that lately. It's this kind of analog neural network design that is apparently it's like it's modeled more closely after the human brain and how neurons actually interact with one another. There are some tricks to it. You like can't exactly backprop through it as far as I understand. But there are some techniques for how to train them, but it's harder to train them than transformers. But I'm super excited about them in the context of that they're kind of perfect for audio and video signals or data and processing it. But remains to be seen whether they can be trained properly. But I'd call that underhyped.
What's one thing you've changed your mind on in AI in the last year?
What have you changed your mind on?
When we started, I think we thought there'd be applications that had like genuine moats, and we were just like, oh, it's like, yeah, this is 6 months after, GPT-3 or 6 months after GPT-4. And so, of course, we haven't seen any moats yet, but like in a year or a year and a half, like there's going to be some real ones. And I think increasingly it's like the underlying models change so much that I think really the only thing you can build is just like be super embedded with your customers, like understand what they need and build super fast. Like it changes way too fast to have anything more than that. And so I think we were so focused on like unique data assets and like, like ways to, and I still think some of that stuff is real, but I think I've pivoted a long way away from that to just like really fast teams, really deeply embedded in their customers, which maybe sounds trite and obvious at the time, but I feel like was when we started, a year ago, we were very much not thinking that way.
Got it.
Well, I think the moats at the application layer will be very similar to traditional SaaS,
Totally,
right?
totally.
Like there'll be something that's hard to build and hard to get into the hands of a bunch of users.
Totally. But it's like when you talk about a consumer company or something, or an infrastructure company, you have this like great sounding moat that's like sounds so smart on a piece of paper. And when you talk about a SaaS company, what their moat is, like it never, it's like a million little things they do super well.
Totally. Yeah. I asked you that question to try to like give me ideas as well, or like jog my thoughts around like, and it ended up doing that. So thank you. I would say that the thing I changed my mind on in the past year around AI is the speed of penetration of AI. So I think that a year ago, even just as an example, like I was thinking that in a year I would be shocked if like people were not using ChatGPT. There's a lot of people that aren't using ChatGPT. I mean, I know it has a lot of users, right? 200 million weekly actives, or that's the reported number, 200 plus. But I'll meet people on a regular basis that have heard of ChatGPT, right? Because it's in the news everywhere, but they don't use it. And they don't really use any form of AI, or at least kind of like the contemporary forms of AI in their work. So it's that's a thing that I think was surprising for me, is that I thought more people, it would have penetrated more rapidly and deeper in the last year.
You have high expectations. I think it's the fastest growing consumer product of all time, but not
Right. Totally. Yeah, totally.
Which AI startup are you most excited about right now besides LiveKit?
It's Tesla. The reason why is I just like I borrowed my co-founder's Tesla. So we went to the XAI Grok hackathon, and I built this voice interface that could control your Tesla, so it could like open its doors and honk the horn and all of this stuff. And most people didn't even know that Tesla had an API, an official API that you can interact with the car. So we did this thing, and then I took his Tesla and I like had it drive itself at 10 p.m. at night on like a Saturday on the highway from San Francisco all the way down to Menlo Park. And I gotta say, I mean, like it was magical the first time I used ChatGPT, but I don't think that like Tesla self-driving gets enough like just holy smokes. Like this thing, it drove me all the way to my co-founder's house. It's like on small streets, like navigating around construction, going on the inside lane and like driving super close to the wall on the 101. It was wild. And I was just, this is a marvel of technology. And I think you take that like with the car and then Tesla bot. I mean, it's just, it's like sci-fi dreams right there. So I'm just, I'd say I'm most excited about them.
I feel like self-driving cars are like the most visceral like experience with tech you can have. It's the first time anyone does it.
That was
so
my
cool.
first time. It was amazing.
I love when people are from out of town, from San Francisco, like showing them that, like putting them in Waymo's. And now Waymo's expanded other places, but it's really powerful.
Really good party trick.
Totally. Obviously, you're in the picks and shovels game right now. But if we were to say, hey, tomorrow you got to go start an AI application, what would you go build?
This question round. I'm gonna say I think there's a bunch of different things that I might go try and build. But an interesting one is I would go build a video game. I'd go build a video game that like has a really, I don't know, novel way of like interacting with NPCs. There are these games like Elden Ring and stuff like that have like just these expansive worlds and all these different plot lines. And I think video games of the future are going to be just amazing in the way that you'll have these open worlds, but then they'll also be filled with like these dynamic, characters that are lifelike, and the stories can change. It's like kind of like choose your own adventure, but with an infinite set of possibilities or permutations. I think that's going to be incredible, and I'd love to work on something like that.
And you can talk to the characters.
Of course, yeah. I mean, that's almost by default. I think that didn't talk about that much, but I think like voice AI applied to video games is going to be it's this thing that maybe that's underhyped, actually.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll change my answer for underhyped. I think video games are just going to be incredible in the future, where you are interacting using your natural human inputs with these characters in different types of worlds. Yeah.
Maybe to give you the last word, where can folks go to learn more about LiveKit and the exciting work that you're doing? What would you kind of point them towards?
Probably like the number one place is to our GitHub. The vast majority of everything that we do is open source. And so we have a variety of different repos and tools and projects there, github.com/LiveKit. But of course, our website as well, livekit.io, and on X, x.com. I always want to call it Twitter because I work there. I did not have Elon buying the company I worked for and then changing it to X on my bingo card. But yeah, x.com/LiveKit.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This was super fun.
Thanks for having me on, guys.